The night I got engaged, my mother raised her glass to my sister, not me, to the prettier one. 100 people laughed on cue. My mother always made sure my sister won. I was about to find out why. My sister struck under the noise, clamped my fiancé's arm, and hissed in his ear. He always wanted me, not you. Everyone knows it. She smiled while she said it. At my own party, I put my drink down. I didn't flinch. Then the man I was marrying kicked his chair back and stood. He looked through my sister like glass. He ripped a sealed envelope from his jacket and dropped it face up between us. My mother stopped laughing first. I'm Araminta Vale, 33. I build bridges, the kind that hold when everything on them is moving. That envelope had waited 6 years for the right people to be standing over it. To understand why my mother went gray before a single page slid out, you have to go back to a locked greenhouse and the woman who left me the key. Only 2 people alive knew who that house really belonged to, and one of them had just pulled out his chair. Everyone in that room believed the house on Foxglove Lane belonged to my mother. It didn't. It had belonged to my grandmother, Euphemia Vale, and she was the only adult who ever looked at me like I was worth the trouble. She kept a narrow house with a glass greenhouse bolted to the back, and she grew lemons in Gloucestershire out of pure stubbornness. When I was 9, she took my face in both hands. This house always knew who it belonged to, she said. Remember that? I thought she meant the lemons. I was 9. My father died when I was 17. His name was Alistair, and he was the buffer between me and my mother. When the buffer was gone, the arithmetic of our family changed overnight. 2 daughters, 1 budget, 1 prize. My mother chose the way you choose a stock. Early, loud, and with everything she had. Cressida was 14 then, beautiful in the way that makes strangers apologize for staring. I was 17, flat-chested, good at maths, inconvenient. My mother did the sums and decided which daughter was worth the investment. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because I watched the money move. Cressida got the orthodontist, the private coach, the modeling headshot at 16. I got a library card and a reminder that university was for people who could pay their own way. When I asked how Cressida's university fees got paid, my mother said the same 3 words she'd say for the next decade. That's family money. I never asked whose family or how much or where it lived. I was too busy surviving. I took 2 jobs and a bursary at a red brick university, and I built a life the way I'd later build bridges, 1 bolt at a time, expecting nothing to hold that I hadn't torqued myself. Here's the part I need you to hold on to. Every good thing my sister has ever owned was bought with money I was told didn't exist. I didn't know that yet. Neither did she. That's what made the next 6 years possible. My grandmother died in March of 2020 inches, the front room on Foxglove Lane with the greenhouse door propped open so she could smell the dirt. I drove down from Yorkshire and sat with her the last 2 nights. My mother arrived on the last morning with Cressida and a solicitor's business card she wouldn't let me see. After the funeral, she gathered us in the kitchen and told us how it would be. Your grandmother left everything to me, she said, to manage for the good of both my girls. She said it like a door closing. I asked to see the will. My mother laughed, a small practice sound I'd hear again at my engagement party. You want to read your grandmother's will? She said, Araminta. She barely remembered your name at the end. That was a lie. My grandmother remembered my name when she'd forgotten the Prime Minister's. But grief makes you soft, and softness makes you easy to steer. And I let it go. I drove back to my flat 3 counties away and let a woman I trusted keep a secret that would have rewritten my whole life. The house went to my mother on paper she never showed me. The greenhouse got a padlock, and a boy I hadn't met yet was at that exact moment 3 years into an engineering degree with no idea his uncle's office kept a file open under the name Vale. For 6 years, I visited that house twice a year and slept in the smallest room. Cressida lived rent-free in the good bedroom between the launches of businesses that never launched. A boutique, a skincare line, a wellness brand with a logo and nothing behind it. Each one folded, each one bankrolled by family money. And every single time I came, the greenhouse stayed locked, the glass going green with algae. The lemon tree my grandmother loved dying in the dark. I used to stand at that padlock and feel something I couldn't name. Now I can name it. It was the feeling of standing outside a door that was already mine. I met Gideon Thorne on a bridge. Not a metaphor. An actual bridge. A 90-year-old steel truss over the River Severn that the council wanted rehabbed instead of demolished. I was the structural engineer. He was the civil lead from the other firm. We argued about load paths for 4 months and got engaged in the 5th. He was steady in a way I didn't trust at first. He listened like the answer mattered. The first time he made me laugh, I actually looked around to see who'd heard it. He asked about my family early, the way people do. I gave him the short version. Mother in Gloucestershire. Sister with a lot of Instagram followers. Grandmother gone. He got quiet at the word grandmother. What was her name? He asked. Euphemia, I said. Effie. Something moved behind his eyes, then went still. I thought it was politeness. I know now it was recognition. I know now the name Euphemia Vale had been sitting in a filing cabinet in his uncle's office since before we ever spoke. He didn't tell me. Not then. And I've made my peace with why. He proposed in June on the bridge after the final inspection passed. No crowd, no photographer, just him. A ring that fit and a question I said yes to before he finished it. The first fight we ever had was about the party. I didn't want one, he didn't push. But my mother heard the word engaged and moved like a woman who'd been waiting for a starting gun. We'll host it, she said on the phone. At the house. It's the proper place. The house. Foxglove Lane. My grandmother's house with the dead lemon tree behind the padlock. I'd rather do something small, I said. Don't be difficult, Araminta, my mother said. For once. Let this family look right. Let this family look right. As if I were the thing that made it look wrong. I should have said no. But there's a groove worn into you by 20 years of being the difficult one. And you slide into it before you notice. I said yes. Gideon watched my face while I did it. You don't want this, he said after I hung up. It's easier, I said. Easier isn't the same as fine. He turned the ring on my finger gently. But if we're going there, I want to come the day before, see the house. At the time I thought it was sweet. He wanted to know where I grew up. He wanted to see the house he'd read about in a will. We drove down the day before the party. My mother met us at the door in a linen dress. All warmth for Gideon. All inspection for me. Cressida floated down the stairs in the good bedroom robe like she was descending into a television advert. So, you're the fiancé, she said, and looked at him the way she looks at anything she hasn't decided whether to take. Gideon shook her hand and let go a half-second too fast. That night, I couldn't sleep in the small room. I went down for water and found him at the back of the house at the greenhouse door, one hand flat against the padlocked glass. Why is it locked? He asked. My mother locked it after Gran died. He looked at the algae, the dead tree, the rusted hasp. That's a crime, he said quietly. I laughed. It's a greenhouse. He didn't laugh. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. I let it go. God help me. I always let it go. If you know that feeling, the one where you swallowed the thing you should say, because saying it costs more than you have that day, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this reaches because what happened at that table the next night is the reason I stopped swallowing. Stay with me. The envelope is still sealed. The morning of the party. The house filled with people who'd never once called me on my birthday. Caterers, cousins, my mother's parish friends. My Aunt Fiona arrived early and went straight into the kitchen with my mother and closed the door. I remember that closed door. I remember thinking it was nothing. Fiona is my mother's younger sister. For 6 years, she'd been the only other adult who signed the papers, cashed the quiet checks, and kept the story straight. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that when I passed the kitchen, the two of them stopped talking, and my mother laughed too fast. Araminta, she said through the doorway. Go change. You look like you came to fix the plumbing. Fiona smiled into her tea. I went up and put on the one nice dress I owned. I stood at my grandmother's old mirror and let myself believe for 1 second that the night might be kind. Then a car turned into the drive. I looked out the window and I saw a second man step out behind Gideon's rental. Older, gray, in a good suit carrying a slim leather folder. Gideon hadn't told me anyone else was coming. The older man's name was Julian. Gideon introduced him at the door as his uncle in from Bath, along for the weekend. My mother lit up the way she does for anyone who looks like money and manners. She took Julian's coat herself. She never took mine. Thorn, she said, shaking his hand. Are you the Thorn from Cheltenham? Something like that, Julian said. He smiled and did not answer the question. He held my hand a beat longer than a stranger should. His eyes went over my face like he was checking it against a photograph. You have her chin, he said. Whose? Your grandmother's. He let go. I'm sorry. I knew her a long time ago. Then my mother swept him toward the good room and the moment closed and I filed it under coincidence. I was very good at filing things under coincidence. It was a survival skill by then. The party filled by 100 people I mostly didn't know, drinking my mother's champagne under a marquee she'd rented to make the back garden look like it had never held a padlocked greenhouse. Somebody had strung fairy lights over the dead glass so you couldn't see the algae in the dark. That was the whole design of my family right there. Lights over the thing they'd killed. Cressida worked the marquee like it was her event. In a sense, it was. My mother had put her in charge of atmosphere, which meant Cressida stood near the champagne with a ring light in her handbag and let the guests come to her. "Is that the sister?" a woman asked. "That's Cressida," another one said. "The pretty one. Araminta's the one who does construction. I do structural engineering on motorway viaducts. But in that marquee, I did construction and Cressida did beauty. And everyone knew the difference because my mother had spent 20 years teaching it. A cousin asked me when I was due. I wasn't pregnant. I was wearing the wrong dress. My mother's best friend, Philippa, found me by the drinks and put a warm hand on my arm. "Sweetheart," she said, "we're all so surprised. We really thought Cressida would be first." First to what? First to be loved out loud. First to matter. I smiled and said something gracious, because the alternative was making a scene. And making a scene was the one crime in my family that got punished every time. Here is the thing about being the daughter who doesn't count. You learn to hear the knives and thank people for the cutlery. Gideon found me between two of these conversations. He put a glass of water in my hand instead of wine. "You're doing the thing," he said. "What thing?" "The one where you go somewhere else and leave your face here." I laughed and it came out shaky. "I've done this party 100 times. I just usually do it from the end of the table." He looked at me for a long second. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight you're at the head of it. I promise you." I thought it was a nice thing to say to a nervous fiancé. It wasn't. It was a fact he already knew, and I didn't. Across the marquee, Julian stood alone at the greenhouse, one hand resting on the padlock, exactly where Gideon's hand had been the night before. Two men I'd known for months and days, both drawn to the same locked door like it was pulling them. I started toward him. My mother got there first. "Julian, you don't want to look at that old thing," she said, steering him back toward the light. "My mother-in-law's little hobby. It's a wreck. We've been meaning to tear it down for years." "Have you?" Julian said. "Not a question. The land's worth more without it." "I'm sure it is," he said, and let her lead him away. And over his shoulder he looked back at the padlock one more time. "Tear it down." She'd said it lightly, the way she said everything that mattered, but something in me went cold and stayed cold. That greenhouse was the last place my grandmother had been happy, and my mother wanted it gone. I told myself she meant nothing by it. I was wrong about that too. She meant to erase the last room in that house that remembered a different will than the one she'd shown. Cressida picked that moment to make her move on my future. She'd been circling Gideon all night, and now she cut him out of a cluster of guests and walked him to the bar with a hand on his back. I watched from across the marquee. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I'd watched Cressida take things my whole life. The last slice, the front seat, the birthday that landed too close to hers. Men were just the newest category. She laughed at something. She touched his arm. She leaned in. Gideon stepped back, set his drink down, and said something I read clean off his lips across 30 feet of marquee. "She's my whole life." Cressida's smile didn't move, but something under it did. She wasn't used to the word no wearing a nice face. She glanced across the marquee, found me watching, and lifted her glass an inch. A toast just for me that said, "This isn't over." It wasn't. She had 2 hours and a plan and a mother who'd back her. But I had something too. I just didn't know its name yet. It was sitting in a leather folder under Julian Thorne's arm, and it had my grandmother's signature on the last page. Somewhere between the marquee and the back door, my phone buzzed. A text from Gideon, though he was standing 40 feet away where I could see him. "Don't let them get you alone. 10 more minutes. Stay where there are people." I looked up. He met my eyes across the garden and didn't smile. Behind him, Julian had stepped into the dark with his phone. One hand cupped over the receiver like a man confirming something he didn't want overheard. 10 more minutes. I typed back one word. "Why?" The 3 dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. Then, because after tonight, you'll never have to ask them for anything again. I stood in the middle of a party that was laughing and clinking and eating my mother's cake, holding a phone that had just promised me the one thing I'd trained myself to stop wanting. I didn't know yet what he meant. I only knew the ground had started to move. I needed a minute away from all of it, I found the one door in that house nobody had bothered to lock because nobody thought it held anything. My grandmother's study. It smelled like her still. Paper and dried lavender and the ghost of pipe smoke from a grandfather I never met. My mother used it for storage now. Boxes of Cressida's failed inventory sat stacked against the shelves. Skincare jars, boutique hangers, a wellness brand's worth of unsold candles. On the desk sat a wooden letter tray, and in the tray, a stack of post. I don't know why I looked. Habit, maybe. Engineers read what's in front of them. The top envelopes were ordinary utility bills, a council tax notice, all addressed to my mother. But near the bottom, the paper changed. Heavier stock. A Navy return address embossed. Thorne and Vance, solicitors, Bath, Somerset. Addressed to the estate of Euphemia Vale. There were 4 of them, different dates. The oldest was 6 years old. The newest was from March. Everyone slid open at the top and read and kept here in a room my mother thought no one entered. Thorne. I stood in that quiet room with my grandmother's lavender in my nose and felt the floor of my life shift a quarter inch. Gideon Thorne. Julian Thorne. Thorne and Vance. 6 years of letters to a dead woman's estate. Hidden in a tray behind my sister's unsold candles. My hands are steady for a living. They weren't steady then. I reached for the newest envelope. That's not yours to read. My mother stood in the doorway. She crossed the room faster than I'd ever seen her move, and took the whole stack out of my hands, calm as folding laundry. What is Thorne and Vance? I said. Estate housekeeping. Boring legal nothing. She tucked the letters under her arm. Your grandmother had accounts that took years to close. I've been handling it so you didn't have to. Handling it for 6 years. Estates are slow, Araminta. She smiled. You wouldn't know. You've never had anything to settle. That last line was meant to land. And it did, the way all of hers did. But under the sting, I was doing maths, and the maths wasn't working. Gideon's last name was on my grandmother's post. My fiancé's uncle knew my grandmother's chin, and my mother had gone gray-white for exactly 1 second before she got her face back. Go check on your guests, she said, and I'd bet leave my things alone. Her things in her mother-in-law's study and her mother-in-law's house. I went to find Gideon. He was on the side patio alone, phone to his ear, and he ended the call the second he saw me. I don't spook easy. I spooked then. Your last name is on my grandmother's post, I said. 6 years of it from your uncle's firm. For a moment, he didn't say anything. That silence told me more than any answer. He wasn't surprised. He was deciding. Yes, he said finally. You knew who I was before the bridge. No. He stepped toward me. Not before the bridge. I swear to you, not before. The bridge was real. You were real before I knew a single thing about, he stopped himself. Araminta, I need you to trust me for 2 more hours. Trust you? My voice came out flat. 20 years of training kept it flat. You've been carrying something about my family, and you let me walk into this house blind. To protect you, he said. If I told you before tonight, you'd have confronted her and she'd have buried it deeper and you'd have lost again. He stopped again. The door in him closed. Lost what? He took both my hands. His were shaking now, too. Everything your grandmother wanted you to have, he said. 2 hours. Then I'll never keep another thing from you as long as I live. I should have walked out. Every instinct I'd built said this was one more person managing me, steering me, deciding what I could handle. The daughter who doesn't count learns to smell it early. But there was a leather folder under his uncle's arm, and 4 hidden letters under my mother's, and a locked greenhouse she wanted torn down before anyone could look inside. Somebody in this house was lying to me. I'd spent my whole life assuming it was me who deserved it. For once, I decided to find out who deserved it instead. 2 hours, I said. And that's the exact moment I stopped being the daughter who swallowed it. If you've ever given someone one last chance to prove they were on your side, knowing it could go either way, drop the word seen in the comments. Somebody in your life needs to read 100 people typing it. Now stay close because in about 90 minutes my mother was going to stand up and toast the wrong daughter and my fiancé was going to be ready. 2 hours is a long time to stand in a marquee and pretend your whole life isn't cracking under the lights. I went back in. I smiled at Philippa. I let a great aunt tell me I'd cleaned up nicely. I watched my family perform a version of me that had never existed. And for the first time, I watched it like an engineer watches a bridge she suspects is failing, noting where the load really sat. The load sat on Cressida. Everything my mother had built ran through her, and Cressida, sensing my attention, decided to press. She tapped a fork against her glass near the center of the marquee and got the room's ear the way she always could. "I just want to say something about my sister," Cressida said, and 100 faces turned, warm, expecting sweetness. "Araminta's always been the practical one," she said, "the reliable one. Not everybody gets to be the fun one. You know, somebody's got to hold the ladder while the rest of us climb it." Laughter. Soft, affectionate laughter at me from people eating my mother's food under my grandmother's dead glass. "Hold the ladder while the rest of us climb it." She smiled at me like she'd handed me a compliment. My mother beamed. Fiona by the marquee pole lifted her glass. I held mine level and said, "Clear enough to carry. Careful, Cressida. The person holding the ladder decides when it comes down." The laughter changed shape just a little. A few people weren't sure anymore who the joke was on. Cressida's smile stayed, but her eyes cut to our mother, checking the way she always checked for permission and for backup. My mother stepped in smooth as oil. "Araminta's had some wine," she announced. "Fond and poisonous. Let's let Cressida finish. She's so good at this." And just like that, I was drunk and difficult. And Cressida was so good at this, and the room resettled around the story it had always been told. 20 years of practice, my mother could recast me as the problem in a single sentence in any weather. But something was different tonight. And it wasn't me. It was the two men by the wall who didn't laugh. Julian Thorne stood with his leather folder against his chest and watched my mother work the room, and his face had gone very still and very cold. The face of a man confirming one more time something he'd suspected for years. Gideon stood beside him. He caught my eye across the marquee and very slightly shook his head. "Not yet. Wait." I waited. Near the kitchen, my Aunt Fiona pulled my mother aside. I was close enough this time. I heard a fragment before they saw me. "If she marries..." My mother's hand closed on Fiona's wrist. Fiona went quiet. Both of them looked at me, then away too fast. "If she marries," she meant me. I filed it, but not under coincidence this time. Under evidence. I drifted to the bar to steady my hands and found Gideon already there, ordering me a water I didn't ask for. "Your aunt just said if she marries like it was a threat," I told him low. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Because it is," he said to them. "Why would my getting married threaten anyone?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him lose a small war with himself. "Because there's a clock," he said. "And it starts the day you do. Your grandmother built it that way on purpose." He pressed the cold glass into my hand. 20 more minutes. "Julian's making a call. Then you'll have all of it, I promise." A clock that started the day I married. A grandmother who built it on purpose. A family that had spent 6 years, and I was starting to understand a great deal longer, making very sure that day never came. I thought about every relationship I'd had that my mother had quietly poisoned. The boyfriend she'd told I was unstable. The near engagement at 26 she'd ended with one phone call and a lie I never got to answer. I'd spent years believing I was simply hard to love. Standing in that marquee holding a glass of water I didn't want, I understood for the first time that I hadn't been hard to love. I'd been expensive to let go. The party ground on around me while I stood there rearranging 33 years. And that was when I caught the piece of conversation that turned the whole night from a wound into a countdown. 2 of my mother's parish friends stood by the dessert table, heads bent together over the cake. "Such a shame they're selling," one of them said. 40 years that family had that house. "I heard it's already sold," the other murmured. "Some developer. They're tearing it down. Luxury flats. Selling. Tearing it down. My grandmother's house." I stood very still with a slice of cake. I had no intention of eating and let that settle on top of everything else. My mother had never breathed a word to me about selling. Why would she? You don't consult the furniture before you rearrange the room. But the timing caught in me like a bad weld. An engagement I hadn't wanted. A party I'd been pushed to host in a house I'd been told was hers. And now, 3 weeks out, a closing I wasn't supposed to know about. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a goodbye my mother was throwing for herself on a stage she was already scheduled to strike. I went to find her and ask straight out if it was true. She found me first. She always did. She caught my elbow in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the study, out of the light, where the guests couldn't see her grip. "You're doing that face," she said low and pleasant. "The sullen one. People are noticing. Fix it. Are you selling the house?" Her fingers tightened on my arm for half a second before she let go. "Where did you hear that? Is it true?" "It's an old house, Araminta. It's a lot to keep up." She smoothed my sleeve where she'd creased it. "Tender as a threat. These are grown-up decisions. You've never had property. You wouldn't understand what it costs." You wouldn't understand the sentence she'd used to end every conversation I'd ever tried to have about money, about the will, about the padlocked glass at the back of the house. "It's Gran's house," I said. "It's my house," she said. And there it was, the flint under the linen, and I'll do what I like with it. What I won't do is let you stand in my hallway and make one of your scenes tonight of all nights. Do you know how it looks? A grown woman sulking at her own engagement, jealous of her sister at 33. She stepped in close and dropped her voice to the register that had shrunk me my whole life. "That man out there is the best thing that's ever happened to you. Don't give him a reason to see what the rest of us have always had to live with." It was aimed perfectly. It always was. She'd found the one fear I'd carried into that house, that Gideon would finally see the version of me she'd spent decades installing in everyone's head, and she pressed on it with a thumb. For one long second, the old gravity had me. I felt my face start to arrange itself into the apology. "Sorry, Mum." "You're right, Mum. I'll fix it, Mum." Then I thought of 4 slit envelopes behind my sister's unsold candles and a leather folder under a stranger's arm in a greenhouse. She was 3 weeks from bulldozing while 100 people ate cake on top of it. "No," I said. "I don't think I will." Her eyes narrowed, the first genuinely surprised look I'd gotten from her in years. She wasn't used to the word landing on her side of the hallway. Before she could reload, a hand touched my shoulder. Gideon. And beside him, Julian, folder against his chest, watching my mother with the flat patience of a man who'd waited 6 years for exactly this hallway. "Araminta," Julian said quietly, a word somewhere private. My mother's gaze flicked from him to the folder to me, and something crossed her face that I'd never once seen there. Not anger, not contempt. The first small edge of fear. They took me to the study, the one room with a door that closed. Julian set his leather folder on my grandmother's desk, in the exact spot where the hidden letters had been an hour before. He didn't open it yet. He looked at me the way surgeons look at you before the part that's going to hurt. "Miss Vale," he said, "I drafted your grandmother's last will and testament in the spring of 2018. I was her solicitor for 30 years. I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything, because once you've heard it, you can't unhear it." "Say it," I said. "Your grandmother left you the house we're standing in," he said, "free and clear in a trust. The proceeds of your grandfather's machine shop invested for more than 40 years. As of this quarter, it stands at just over 1.2 pounds million. The room went very quiet. Out in the marquee, someone laughed at something. "That's not possible," I said. "My mother inherited everything. She said so for 6 years." "Your mother inherited nothing," Julian said. "There was one will. This one. It names you as the sole beneficiary and Thorne and Vance as executor and trustee. Your mother was never in it except by name. In the one passage about her, your grandmother insisted on including." He almost smiled. "It reads, 'I trust my son Alistair's wife to want what is best. I do not trust her to know it.'" That was my grandmother's voice exactly. I heard it in the room. "The trust has one condition," Julian went on. "The principal distributes to you on the occasion of your lawful marriage. Not before." Euphemia was very specific. She wanted you to build a life of your own first. A partner. A home that no one could take, and only then the means to hold it. She was afraid that if you got the money young and alone, your mother would find a way to manage it. To manage you. "The clock," I said. "That starts when I marry." "The clock," Julian agreed, "that your mother has spent 6 years making sure never started." And there it was. The boyfriend called unstable. The engagement ended by a phone call at 2:06. Not a mother's cruelty for its own sake. A trustee protecting an inheritance she'd stolen by making sure the rightful heir stayed single, small, and certain she deserved it. Every relationship of mine my mother had ever burned to the ground. She'd burned to keep this house. "When Gran died," I said slowly, "the firm should have contacted me. Why didn't you?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Because your mother told my late partner you were estranged, living abroad, uninterested." She produced a letter, an old note in your grandmother's hand from years earlier before the will, saying she wanted Camilla to look after the girls. "It's not a will. It's worthless. But my partner was ill. And your mother was persuasive. And the file went dormant, pending contact from you. Contact she made certain never came." He touched the stack of navy envelopes now sitting on the desk. My mother had left them there, and Julian had retrieved them. "We wrote you 4 times care of this house." She opened every one. 6 years of letters meant for me, read and hidden behind my sister's unsold candles. I made myself ask the question I least wanted answered. I turned to Gideon. And you? I said. How does the bridge fit into a will? He didn't look away. I'll give him that forever. He looked right at me. It doesn't, he said. The bridge came first. I met you. I fell for you. And months in, one night you told me your grandmother's name was Euphemia Vale. I'd grown up hearing my uncle talk about a Vale estate that ate at him, an heir who vanished, a will that never executed. I put it together on your sofa and I didn't sleep for a week. And you told your uncle? I told my uncle. His voice stayed even. He asked me to confirm you were really her, that you were alive, that you were the granddaughter in the will. I hated it. It felt like spying on the person I loved. So, I did two things. He reached into his jacket and I flinched because I'd know that motion later at the table. But this time he pulled out a single folded page. Before I proposed, I signed this, a waiver. I gave up any claim, any interest, any pound of that trust forever in writing, witnessed. I did it so that no matter what happened tonight, you would know I did not marry you for a penny of it. He set it on the desk beside the will. I looked at the two papers, and here's the ugly truth about being raised the way I was raised. I couldn't feel the love in it. I could only feel the management. Another person deciding what I could handle, another plan built around me without me in the room. You've all known for weeks, I said. My voice was very calm. It's always very calm at the worst moments. You planned a whole evening and nobody asked me. Araminta, Gideon started. I have spent my entire life being handled by people who said it was for my own good. I stepped back from the desk, from both of them, from the will and the waiver and the 6 years of stolen letters. I don't know how to tell the difference between someone protecting me and someone steering me. I never learned. Nobody let me. I walked out of the study. Behind me, £1,000,000, and the truth sat on a dead woman's desk, and I couldn't touch either one. I walked out the front, past the marquee, to the row of cars in the dark, where nobody would see my face do whatever it was about to do. I put my hand on my own car door. I could leave, drive 3 counties home, change my number, let the whole rotten thing collapse without me in the frame. Piece of a kind, the kind I'd always chosen. You have her walk. A voice said behind me. Euphemia. She walked away from things the same way. Chin up. Shoulders like a door closing. An old woman stood between the cars. A cardigan over her party dress. A cigarette she wasn't lighting between 2 fingers. I'm Enid, she said. Harlech. I lived next to your grandmother for 41 years. You used to eat my strawberries through the fence. I did remember. A gap in a hedge, small red hands. Your mother invited me for decoration, Enid said dryly. An old friend of the family to make it all look warm. She has no idea. I know exactly what she did. What did she do? I said, testing. She told the whole street Effie left her the house. Enid finally lit the cigarette, one puff, and put it out against her heel. I sat with your grandmother every Thursday for 30 years. She told me 100 times. The house is Araminta's. Araminta's the one who sits with me. Araminta's the one who listens. She said you'd get the greenhouse and grow something better than lemons. Enid's eyes were wet and furious. Then she died, and your mother padlocked that greenhouse inside a month, and I knew I couldn't prove a thing. But I knew I stood in the dark and let an old neighbor tell me what a courtroom couldn't. That I hadn't imagined it. That I'd been loved specifically and on purpose by the one person whose love I'd been told I was too little to have earned. She gave you a key, Enid said. Didn't she? Little brass thing, green ribbon for the greenhouse. You were maybe 8. My hand went to my key ring before my brain caught up. It was still there. It had been on every key ring I'd owned for 25 years. A small brass key on a rotted scrap of green ribbon, opening nothing I'd ever found. And I had never once been able to make myself throw it away. I kept it, I said. My voice cracked on the second word. Of course you did, Enid said gently. You always knew somewhere. You just didn't have the paperwork. Inside the marquee, a fork rang against a glass, then another. The sound of a room being called to order. The sound of my mother about to speak. Enid looked toward the light. Whatever you're deciding out here, she said, decide it fast because that woman is about to stand up and tell 100 people a story, and it's the same story she's told your whole life. You can let her tell it again. She put the dead cigarette in her pocket, or you can walk back in there and be the one holding the key. I looked at the little brass key in my palm. It didn't fit the greenhouse padlock anymore. My mother had changed the lock the month Gran died. I'd learn later, precisely, so the real key would fit nothing. But that wasn't the point. My grandmother hadn't given me a key to a shed. She'd given me a promise 25 years early, and made me carry it until I was strong enough to understand it. I closed my hand around it. Then I walked back toward the light, past the marquee flap, to the head of the room where my mother was already rising, glass in hand, and my sister was already drifting toward my fiancé. And every single person I'd let define me for 33 years was about to find out they'd measured the wrong daughter. Gideon saw me come in. He read my face. He was always good at that. And he understood that I'd decided. He slid one hand inside his jacket to the sealed envelope and waited for my eyes. I gave him the smallest nod of my life. He gave me one back and the leather folder came off the table. But you don't take down a bridge while it's still being built. You wait until the whole load is on it. I caught Gideon's eye and mouthed one word. Wait, he frowned. Julian, beside him, understood before Gideon did. An old solicitor knows the value of letting the other side finish. He laid the folder flat again under his hand and waited. Because my mother was about to stand in front of 100 witnesses and tell her story one more time on the record in her own words, and I wanted every one of them to hear it before it fell. She rose at the center of the marquee, glass high, and the room hushed for her, the way it never once hushed for me. Thank you all for coming, my mother said, warm as a hearth. It means the world to see this family surrounded by so much love. This family, as if it were a single thing, and not a wall she'd built with me on the wrong side. When my daughters were small, she went on, I used to look at the two of them and think, how did I get so lucky? Two girls so different. Cressida. She reached out and Cressida stepped into the reach like it was choreographed because it was. My bright one, my beautiful one, the one who lights up every room she's ever walked into. Applause. Cressida dipped her head, modest, radiant, a professional. And Araminta? My mother said. And the whole marquee turned to find me, and her voice changed by exactly 1 degree. My steady one, my practical girl. Lord knows she didn't get the easy gifts, but she works so hard. We're all just so proud she found someone. 33 years old, an engineer who holds up motorways. And my own mother introduced my engagement like a rescue. The room made a sound, that soft, pitying awe that follows a woman who's been graded on a curve her whole life and told to smile about it. I stood at the edge of the light, and I didn't smile and I didn't argue. I let her keep building. You know, my mother said, swirling her glass, people always ask me my secret. 2 girls so different, both turned out so well. A practiced pause. I always say you love them the same, but you can't lie to them. Cressida got the looks. Araminta got the reliability. Laughter. You give each child what's true. What's true? She'd spent 6 years and a stolen fortune manufacturing what was true, and now she served it to 100 people as folk wisdom. Across the marquee, Fiona lifted her glass in agreement. Cressida beamed, and I watched my mother's face and understood something I'd never let myself see before. She wasn't cruel by accident. She wasn't a woman who'd simply loved unevenly. She was a woman who had needed one daughter to be worthless, so the theft would look like love, and she'd performed that need so long she'd come to believe it was true. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the scapegoat. It isn't that they don't love you, it's that your smallness is load-bearing. Take it away and the whole structure they've built comes down. I was about to take it away. My mother raised her glass higher, ready to land the toast she'd given in one form or another at every gathering of my entire life. Cressida peeled off from her side and drifted casual toward the table where Gideon sat, toward my fiancé in front of everyone on the night of my engagement. Because in this family, taking from me was a kind of tradition, and no one had ever once told her to stop. I set my drink down on the table. I flattened my hands beside it, and my mother opened her mouth to toast the prettier one. To the prettier one, my mother said, and tipped her glass at Cressida, and 100 people laughed. You've heard those words already. You heard them at the start before you knew what they cost. Now you know. She wasn't teasing. She was pronouncing a verdict she'd handed down my entire life, and the whole room said, Amen. Under the laughter, Cressida reached my fiancé. She curled a hand around his arm and put her mouth to his ear, close enough that I saw her lips move. He always wanted me, not you. Everyone knows it. She said it to me with her eyes while she said it to him with her mouth. She smiled the whole time. She was so sure. She'd taken from me 100 times, and it had always been allowed. I set my drink down. I didn't flinch. And Gideon stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't peel her hand off his arm like it disgusted him, though I think it did. He simply rose and looked at Cressida as if she were a smudge on a window and stepped clear of her hand so it fell through empty air. Don't, he said to her quietly. Ever. Then he reached into his jacket, and he took out the sealed envelope, and he laid it face up on the table where the light could find it. The marquee went quiet in patches, then all at once. My mother's smile held, but her eyes went to the envelope and stayed there. And for one full second, the color left her face. 1 second before 6 years of practice put it back. "What on earth is that?" she said with a little laugh for the crowd. "Gideon, sweetheart, this is a party." "It's a will," Gideon said. "Euphemia Vale's will, the real one. The word will move through that marquee like a draft." 100 people leaned an inch closer. And my mother, I have to give her this, did not miss a beat. She set down her own glass, pressed a hand to her chest, and turned to the room with the wounded warmth of a woman betrayed at her own table. "Oh, honey," she said to me loud, tender, devastating. "Not tonight. Not this again. This again." As if there had ever been a first time. "Everyone," my mother said, spreading her hands. "I am so sorry. I owe you an explanation." Her voice caught perfectly. "My Araminta has struggled for years with jealousy, with her sister. We've gotten her help. We've tried everything. And I had truly hoped that tonight, of all nights," she pressed her lips together. "Brave. That tonight she wouldn't do this." I watched 100 faces I'd known my whole life turn toward me and rearrange into that expression. The soft, pitying, disappointed one. Poor, unstable Araminta, bringing solicitors and lies to her own engagement party, jealous of her sister to the last. "This man," my mother went on, warming, pointing one manicured finger at Julian, "I have never seen in my life. He walks into my home, my late mother-in-law's home, with a folder and a story on the arm of a man my daughter met a year ago. And you want to talk about a will?" She laughed, and it landed, and half the room laughed with her, relieved to be back in a story they understood. "I have my mother-in-law's letter in her own hand. I've had it for 6 years. It's in the study right now. Shall I get it? Shall I show you all what Euphemia actually wanted?" "Please," Julian said, calm as still water. "Do." But my mother didn't move to get it. She never intended to. The offer was the weapon. The letter was nothing. And Julian knew it. And she knew he knew it. And so she pivoted to the thing that had never once failed her. "Me, Araminta," she said, gentle now, coming toward me with her arms half open, playing it for the crowd. "Sweetheart, put a stop to this. Tell everyone the truth. Tell them you're not well. Let me take you inside. Let me take you inside." The oldest sentence in my life. The one that had ended every scene I'd ever tried to make. Every time I'd ever come close to being believed. And for one breath, one long terrible breath in front of 100 people who'd already decided, I felt the old gravity take hold, the pull to fold, to be walked inside, to let her tell it, because she always told it and she always won. Half the marquee was already looking at me like I was the problem in the room. It was without question the worst moment of my life. And it's exactly where she'd always beaten me. Not this time. "No," I said. Not loud. I've never been loud. But a marquee full of people goes quiet at the word no when it comes from the person who's supposed to say yes. "I'm not going inside, Mum." I kept my hands flat on the table so no one could call them anything but steady. "And I'm not unwell. I've been the calmest person in this family for 33 years. You just needed everyone to think otherwise." My mother's face flickered. "Araminta, you said you have Gran's letter in the study." I looked at her. "You don't. You have 4 letters in the study. I saw them tonight. They're not from Gran. They're addressed to her estate from Thorne and Vance. And you opened every one." A murmur moved through the marquee. My mother's mouth opened. And for the first time all night, nothing came out fast enough. "That's my daughter's illness talking," she said to the room. But the warmth had gone thin. "She's been in my things." "Read it," I said to Julian. All of it out loud. Cressida chose that moment to start crying. Real glassy, beautiful tears right on schedule. "Why are you doing this?" She sobbed at me. At your party. Why do you always have to ruin everything?" And it worked a little, the way it always worked. A ripple of sympathy went back toward her. Somebody's aunt said, "Oh, that poor girl." My mother put a protective arm around Cressida and glared at me over her head. "Victorious, certain, home free." Fiona stepped up beside them, 3 against 1, a wall I'd known my whole life. "You should be ashamed," she hissed at me, "after everything your mother did for you." For one more second, the old story held. 3 of them tearful and united and wronged. One of me cold and difficult and making a scene. 100 people who'd watched that exact play 100 times and always clapped for the same cast. Then Julian Thorne opened the folder. He didn't hurry. He was 66 years old and he had waited 6 years for this, and he was not going to rush it. He took out a document thick with pages, the last one heavy with a solicitor's embossed seal, and he held it up so the light caught the raised stamp and the Marquis got very, very quiet. "This is the last will and testament of Euphemia Ann Vale," he said. "Executed 11 March 2018. Signed in my office before 2 witnesses and a solicitor, both of whom are alive and available." He looked at my mother over his glasses. "It is the only valid will she ever made, and I'm going to read you the part your family has spent 6 years praying you'd never hear." My mother's arm slid off Cressida's shoulders. "I leave my home at Foxglove Lane," Julian read, "and the entirety of the Vale Trust to my granddaughter, Araminta Vale, who sat with me, who listened, and who never once asked me for a thing." The silence changed quality. It stopped being the silence of a room watching a woman fall apart. It became the silence of a room realizing it had been watching the wrong woman fall apart for years. "There's more," Julian said. "To my daughter-in-law Camilla." "Stop," my mother said. "Your grandmother left one passage," Julian read louder. "I trust my son Alistair's wife to want what is best. I do not trust her to know it." Nobody laughed now. 100 people who had toasted the prettier one 4 minutes ago stood in my grandmother's back garden and heard my grandmother, in her own words, witnessed and sworn, name me. Not Cressida, not Camilla. Me, the one who sat with her, who listened, who never asked for a thing. I looked at my mother across the marquee she'd rented to cover the greenhouse she'd killed. She wasn't pale anymore. She was gray. My mother recovered the way cornered people do, by attacking the source. "She was sick," she said loud to the room. My mother-in-law was 80 years old and half out of her mind. This so-called solicitor talked a confused old woman into signing a paper that cut out her own family. That's not a will. That's elder abuse with an embossed stamp. It was a good lie. Fast, plausible, aimed at the sympathy of every person there with an aging parent. A few faces wavered back toward her. Julian didn't raise his voice. He raised the pages. "Euphemia Vale scored 100% on a cognitive evaluation 11 days before she signed this," he said. "I insisted on it precisely because I knew someone would one day say what you just said. The report is attached. The doctor is alive. Your mother-in-law was, and I quote her, sharper than everyone at this firm, including the young ones." He set the pages down. "She knew exactly what she was doing, Camilla. She was protecting her granddaughter from you, and she was right to." "This is my house," my mother said. Her voice cracked on house. "It has never been your house," Julian said. "Which brings me to the post." He lifted the 4 navy envelopes, the ones from the study, the ones I'd found under Cressida's unsold candles. "Over 6 years," Julian said, turning so the whole marquee could see. "My firm sent 4 registered letters to this address to the estate of Euphemia Vale, requesting that the named heir, Araminta, contact us to execute the trust. 4 letters. Everyone was signed for at this house. Everyone was opened." He held up the slit-top edges, "and everyone was hidden while Mrs. Vale told my late partner that her daughter was estranged and living overseas. He let that sit. Opening post addressed to another party and concealing it to control an estate is not a family disagreement," Julian said quietly. "It is fraud by false representation and post-interception. It is a Crown Prosecution Service matter and it has your fingerprints on 6 years of it." The words Crown Prosecution Service did what will and elder abuse hadn't. It sobered the room like a splash of cold water. People took a small step back from my mother. The physical distance a crowd puts between itself and someone who's just become a liability. "And that's when Fiona made her mistake. She didn't open them alone," Fiona blurted. "At my mother, not at me. Panic does that. It turns co-conspirators into witnesses in half a second. You told me they were junk. You told me it was handled. If there's a crime here, Camilla, you are not pinning it on." "Shut up, Fiona," my mother said. Too late. 100 people had just watched the sister confirm the whole thing existed. I hadn't said a word in 2 minutes. I didn't need to. I'd spent my life learning to stand still while other people revealed themselves. And now, finally, a room full of witnesses was watching them do it, one at a time, in their own voices. Exactly the way I'd hoped when I told Gideon to wait. Fiona was backing toward the marquee flap now, shaking her head, already rehearsing the version where she was a bystander. Cressida had gone quiet, her tears forgotten, staring at the will in Julian's hand like she was doing maths for the first time in her life. She was. I watched it happen. I watched my beautiful, funded, effortless sister begin to count. "I'd like to say something." Enid Harlech stepped out of the crowd, cardigan and all, and the Marquis turned to the old woman nobody had counted as a player. "I sat with Euphemia Vale every Thursday for 30 years, she said, her voice thin but carrying, until the week she died. "And I will swear on anything you put in front of me." She told me over and over that this house and everything in it was for Araminta. "Araminta's the one who listens," she'd say. "Araminta gets the greenhouse." Enid's chin lifted and she looked straight at my mother. "You padlocked that greenhouse 3 weeks after the funeral, Camilla. I watched you do it from my kitchen window. I've waited 6 years to say that in front of people who'd finally believe me. It's one thing to hear a will. It's another to hear a neighbor who loved your grandmother stand in a crowd and tell the truth she'd carried alone. That's the thing about a lie this size. It needs everyone to stay quiet. It only takes one Thursday neighbor to bring it down." Julian picked the thread back up while the room was still soft. "The trust Effie left to Araminta," he said, "was built from the sale of her late husband's tool and die business, invested since 1981. As of this quarter, it stands at £1,200,000. He turned deliberately to Cressida. "For 6 years, with no legal authority whatsoever, your mother has been drawing from estate assets she did not own. University fees, a mews house, 3 failed businesses. A great deal of it, Miss Vale, spent on you." Cressida made a sound I'd never heard her make. Small, human. "That's not true," she whispered. But she wasn't looking at Julian. She was looking at her mother. "Mum, tell him that's not true. My university, the flat, you said that was Dad's insurance." "You said Cressida," our mother said. "Not now. You said it was Dad's money." Cressida's voice climbed, cracking. "You told me I earned the rest. You told me I was the one who—" She stopped. Her hand went to her mouth, and I watched my sister understand all at once that the whole architecture of her life, the specialness, the funding, the certainty that she was the one worth spending on, had been built on a sister she'd been taught to step over. For 1 second, I felt something for her I hadn't planned to feel. She was a weapon our mother had forged and aimed, and she'd never once been told the truth, either. She'd been handed my life and told it was a gift she deserved. That's its own kind of theft. But then Cressida turned to me, wet-faced, and reached for the oldest tool in the family drawer. "Araminta," she said, trembling. "Sweet, you're not going to take everything from me, are you? Your own sister." And there it was. Even now, even here, the reflex to make me the one who takes, so she could stay the one who's taken from. I looked at my sister for a long moment. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. "I'm not taking anything, Cressida," I said. "I'm just stopping you from keeping what was never yours." She flinched like I'd slapped her. It was, I think, the first honest sentence anyone in our family had ever said to her. The room had turned all the way over by then, and I could feel it the way you feel weather change. An hour ago, these people had laughed at my mother's toast and pitied me across the marquee. Now they stood in loose, embarrassed knots, holding drinks they'd stopped sipping, doing the private arithmetic of everyone who's ever clapped for the wrong person. Philippa found me, the same Philippa who'd stopped me by the drinks 2 hours earlier to say the whole family was so surprised they'd really thought Cressida would be first. She couldn't quite meet my eyes now. "Araminta," she started. "I had no idea. Your mother always said—" "I know what my mother always said," I told her, not unkindly. "So did everyone in this garden." That was the point of saying it. Philippa had no answer for that. She drifted back into the crowd, and I watched her go, and felt nothing I'd have to apologize for later. An older man I half recognized, a retired judge my grandmother had played bridge with decades back, cleared his throat near Julian. Euphemia talked about her granddaughter constantly, he said to no one and everyone. The engineer, the one who visited. "I always wondered why we never saw her at Christmas." He looked at my mother and his face closed like a ledger. "Now I know. One at a time, the story my family had told about me for 33 years came apart in public. Not because I argued it, but because the people who'd believed it were finally standing in a room where the truth was louder. That's the part no one warns the liars about. A lie this big needs 100 quiet rooms. It only survives until someone opens the windows. Fiona was long gone. Cressida had sunk into a folding chair, staring at nothing, and my mother stood in the middle of a marquee full of people who had, in the space of one toast, stopped being her audience. My mother had run out of daughters to hide behind, so she came for the last card she had. "He put you up to this," she said, wheeling on Gideon, her voice gone ragged and mean. Some engineer nobody's heard of shows up, romances my daughter, and a year later there's a solicitor, and a will and £1,000,000. You think we're stupid? She turned to the room, playing the last of her crowd. This isn't about Euphemia. This is a gold digger who found a lonely woman with an inheritance she didn't even know she had. It was honestly her best shot. It even had a grain of ugly plausibility. And it was aimed straight at the one wound I hadn't closed, the fear I'd carried into the study an hour ago, that I'd been chosen for what I was worth, not who I was. Gideon didn't flinch. He looked at Julian. Show them. Julian drew out a single folded page and handed it not to the room, but to me. Read it yourself first, he said. You should be the one. My hands were steady now. I unfolded it. It was a waiver signed and dated 3 days before Gideon proposed, witnessed by 2 people at Thorne and Vance. In plain language, it renounced any claim, interest, or benefit, present or future, that Gideon Thorne might ever have in the Vale trust or estate, by marriage or otherwise, in perpetuity. He had signed away every pound before he got down on one knee, so that no one, not my mother, not the room, not the frightened part of me, could ever say he'd married me for the money. I didn't want you to find out like this, Gideon said low. Just to me. I signed it in May. I wasn't going to tell you tonight. I was going to tell you never and just let it be true. His jaw tightened. You spent your whole life being wanted for what you could give people. I needed there to be one thing in your life that could never be about that. Us. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him, and the last brick my mother had spent 33 years laying, the one that said you are loved only for your use, came loose in my chest and fell. That's forged, my mother said weakly. It's witnessed and sworn, Julian said, like everything else your family has spent tonight pretending doesn't exist. He turned to the crowd with the flat finality of a man closing a file. One more document and then I'll let these good people go home. The deeds to this house. He held it up. Foxglove Lane was transferred into the Euphemia Vale Trust in 2018 and passes with the trust to Araminta. Legally, as of the moment Euphemia died, this has been Araminta's house. Your mother simply never recorded the transfer with the land registry. The executed deed has sat in my office safe for 8 years, which is the only reason the council still shows her name, and the only reason a developer's title search hadn't already stopped her cold. He looked around the marquee at the rented light strung over the dead greenhouse, at the 100 guests, at my mother. Everyone here has spent the evening as a guest in her home, including you, Camilla. You have been living in your daughter's house, spending your daughter's inheritance for 6 years. The marquee was silent enough to hear the fairy lights buzz, and my mother, cornered, exposed, stripped of every daughter and every lie, did the thing villains do instead of apologizing. She got cruel. Fine, she spat, rounding on me, and all the warmth was gone now. All the performance and what was left was the true face I'd known since I was 17. Take it. Take the house. Take the money. Take all of it. You always wanted it. You always were jealous and grasping and cold. Her voice rose to a shriek. And you have never, not once, been the pretty one, and no piece of paper is ever going to change that. The words hung there naked in front of 100 people, and I finally understood they had never had any power at all, only the ones I'd loaned them. You're right, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was never the pretty one. I picked up my glass from the table. I raised it the way she'd raised hers an hour and a lifetime ago. To the prettier one, I said, and I tipped it toward my sister gently, without cruelty. She can keep that. I was the one Gran trusted. Turns out that's the part that came with the house. I thought that was the bottom of it. It wasn't. Julian wasn't finished. And the last page in his folder was the one that explained why all of this was happening tonight in a marquee in a hurry instead of quietly in a courtroom next year. There's a reason we couldn't wait, he said. He set down a glossy sheet, a real estate listing with a photograph of the house we were standing in. 9 days ago, Camilla signed a listing agreement to sell this property. Cash buyer, a developer. The plan on file is a teardown. The house and the greenhouse both cleared for a new build. He looked at my mother. Closing was scheduled for the end of this month. You were 3 weeks from selling your daughter's inheritance and her grandmother's home out from under her, and pocketing £900,000 before anyone was the wiser. The land's worth more without it. She'd set it to Julian by the padlock, light as anything, and I'd gone cold and not known why. Now I knew she hadn't been musing. She'd already sold it. My grandmother's greenhouse was scheduled for a bulldozer, and my mother had rented a marquee to throw a party on top of the grave. Something moved through me then that wasn't rage. Rage, I knew. This was colder and more useful. It was the feeling of a load finally fully understood. Every force accounted for, every failure point mapped. That's why you pushed so hard to host it here, I said. One last party in the house before you sold it. A goodbye you got to control. My mother didn't answer. That was answer enough. Across the marquee, Fiona bolted. Actually bolted heels and all for the car park. Nobody stopped her. There was nowhere to run to that Julian's folder couldn't follow. And the 100 guests who toasted the prettier one an hour ago were doing the thing crowds do when a story turns all the way over. They were putting down their glasses. They were finding their coats. They were looking at my mother the way you look at a bridge you just watched, fail with the horror of having stood on it and the relief of being off. I stepped into the center of the marquee. For the first time in my life in that family, I took the middle of the room on purpose. You can all stay for cake if you want, I said, and a few people actually laughed. The shaky laugh of people grateful for permission to breathe. But I understand if you'd rather go. It's been a long toast. Then I turned to my mother and my sister and the empty space where my aunt had been, and I said the only thing I'd driven all this way to say, though I hadn't known it until that moment. This is my house, I said. It has been for 6 years and I'm not selling it. Most of the guests were gone within 20 minutes. The caterers packed up the champagne. No one was drinking. The fairy lights stayed on over the dead greenhouse, humming, ridiculous, and nobody turned them off. Julian walked me to the quiet end of the marquee and spoke to me the way he must have spoken to my grandmother, plainly and without softening. You have every right to end her, he said. The pending sale is fraud on its face. The concealed post is a criminal matter. The 6 years of estate assets she spent are recoverable, and the Crown Prosecution Service would take this file gladly. I can have the sale frozen Monday morning and a criminal referral filed by Friday. Say the word and I'll burn it all down for you. You've earned that. I looked across the marquee at my mother, who sat alone now in a folding chair, spine straight, chin up, waiting to see which way the axe fell. She wasn't crying. She would never cry for real. Not about this. She was calculating still even now, reading me for weakness the way she'd read me my whole life. Here's what 33 years of being underestimated teaches you. You learn the difference between winning and needing them to lose. Freeze the sale, I said. Void it. Recover what's recoverable. Every pound that can be traced back into the trust. The house stays. The greenhouse stays. I paused. But I'm not filing charges. Not because she deserves mercy. Because I'm not going to spend the next 3 years of my life in a courtroom letting her be the center of my story one more time. She's had 33 years of that. She doesn't get 3 more. Julian studied me and something in his old face settled. Your grandmother, he said, would have said exactly that, almost word for word. I walked over to my mother. I didn't sit. I wasn't going to give her the picture of us at eye level, close, a family working it out. You're going to move out by the end of the month, I said. You and whatever's yours, actually yours. The sale is dead. The money that can be found is going back where it belongs, and you're not going to contact me, or Gideon, or Enid, or anyone who stood in this garden tonight. My mother wept. After everything I did, she said quietly. Raising you alone after your father left me with nothing. He left you a fortune, I said. It just wasn't yours. You'd throw your own mother out of her home. It was never your home. I kept my voice level. It cost me nothing now to keep it level. You keep saying that word like repeating it makes it true. That's the whole trick, isn't it? Say it enough times and everyone believes it. I believed it for 33 years. I looked at her. I don't anymore. She had no answer to that. For the first time in my life, my mother had no answer. She didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that because I know how these stories are supposed to end with the villain weeping and the daughter forgiving and everyone hugging under the lights. That's not what happened. My mother never once said she was sorry. What she said as she stood and gathered her handbag and her ruined evening was the truest thing she'd said all night. You were always the one I couldn't control, she said, bitter, almost admiring. Even when you were small, I could make you quiet. I could never make you doubt her. Her, my grandmother, the one adult I'd never stopped believing in. Even when I'd stopped believing in myself. No, I said, you couldn't. And that, it turned out, was the whole ball game. My grandmother had planted one thing in me that my mother could never dig out. The certainty that I had been loved by someone once, on purpose, for real. It had cost my mother a house and a fortune to try to bury it. She'd failed for one reason. You can steal a will. You can't steal a Thursday afternoon in a greenhouse with a woman who chose you. Cressida found me by the drinks table where Philippa had ambushed me hours earlier in a different life. She'd stopped performing without the tears and the ring light and the certainty. She looked younger and lost and about 20 years overdue for a hard conversation. "I didn't know," she said. "Araminta, I swear to God, I didn't know the money was yours. I thought she told me I earned it. She told me I was the one who deserved," her voice broke. "She used me to hurt you, and I let her because it felt good to be the one who deserved things. I'm not going to pretend that isn't true. It was the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. I didn't rush to make it easier. The Muse house has to go back," I said. "The money that can be traced comes back to the trust. That's not negotiable." "I know. And I'm not your bank. And I'm not your mother. And I'm not going to spend my life managing you the way she did." I softened a little because she was 30 and terrified, and in her own bought and paid for way, also a thing our mother had wrecked. "But if you want to build something real, something you actually make instead of something you're handed, I'll answer the phone once and we'll see if you mean it." She nodded, crying quietly. And for the first time, it wasn't a weapon. It was just a person who'd have to become someone new or become nothing. I didn't know which she'd choose. I still don't entirely. But I'd said the true thing and left the door open a crack. And that was as much as I owed her, and slightly more than she'd earned. Then everyone was gone, and it was just us in the garden. Me, Gideon, Julian folding his terrible, wonderful folder, and Enid Harlech stacking chairs like she owned the place, which in the way that mattered, she half did. Gideon came and stood in front of me. He didn't touch me yet. He'd learned in a year that I need the choice to be mine. "I'm sorry I carried it alone," he said. "You spent your whole life being handled. I didn't want to be one more person doing it to you, and I did it anyway. I'll be answering for that for a while, and I should be." I looked at the man who'd signed away a fortune 3 days before he asked me a question, so that the only thing I'd ever have to believe about him was that he wanted me for nothing but myself. "You didn't handle me," I said. "You held a door and let me decide whether to walk through it." I took his hand. My choice. I walked through it. He let out a breath he'd probably been holding since the study. Then he pulled me in, and over his shoulder, I saw the fairy lights buzzing above the padlocked glass. And for the first time all night, I let myself look straight at the greenhouse instead of past it. 3 weeks earlier, my grandmother's last happy place had been scheduled for a bulldozer. It wasn't anymore. Julian froze the sale that Monday at 9 inches the morning with one phone call and a copy of the trust. The developer's solicitor stopped arguing. The second he heard the words witnessed and sworn, the cash buyer walked. My grandmother's house came off the market before most of the guests had finished telling the story at brunch. The money came back in pieces the way stolen things do. The 3 failed businesses were gone. You can't recover money that was already burned on candles nobody bought. But the bulk of the trust had sat untouched, because even my mother had been afraid to spend the principal outright. And what she drained came back through a lien on the Muse house, and a settlement Julian drew up in language my mother's new solicitor took one look at and advised her to sign. She signed. There wasn't a version of the story where she didn't. She moved out by the end of the month. She went to a rented place on the other side of town, not to Fiona's because Fiona wasn't speaking to her. The two of them had spent 6 years keeping a secret together, and about 90 seconds blaming each other for it in front of 100 people. And some bridges don't come back once the load's been off them that long. I didn't gloat about it. I didn't have to. Some consequences arrive without any help from you. Cressida gave up the flat. She took a job, an actual job at a marketing firm, entry level, no ring light. She called me once in August to ask a real question about a real problem, and she didn't ask for money, and I answered the phone the way I'd said I would once. We'll see if she means it. The door's open a crack. The rest is up to her, which is the first thing in her life that ever has been. Gideon and I moved into the house on Foxglove in September. The first thing I did before the furniture, before the boxes, before anything was walk to the back of the house with a pair of bolt cutters and stand in front of the greenhouse. The padlock my mother had put on it 6 years ago was rusted, almost solid. The little brass key on the green ribbon, the one I'd carried on every keyring since I was 8, had never fit it. She'd changed the lock the month Gran died on purpose, so the real key would open nothing. That was my mother's whole method in a single object. Give the child a key, then change the lock, then tell her she'd been given nothing. I cut the padlock off myself. It took both hands and all my weight, and it fell into the dead grass with a sound I'll feel in my chest for the rest of my life. Then I opened my grandmother's door for the first time in 6 years, and the smell came out to meet me. Dirt and rust and old green water. And I stepped into the room that had been mine since before I understood what mine meant. The lemon tree was dead. 6 years in the dark had finished it. I'd expected that, and it still sat in my throat like a stone. But on the potting bench, under a film of dust, sat a small tin box I didn't remember. Old, painted, the kind that once held tea. It had a tiny brass lock on the front, cheap and rusted. I don't know why I reached for the key on my ring. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had made me keep a key for 25 years that opened nothing. The brass key slid into the clasp and turned like it had been cut for it that morning. Because it hadn't been for the greenhouse door at all. My grandmother had never meant it for the padlock. She'd given an 8-year-old a key to a box she'd leave behind, and trusted her to still be carrying it whenever she was finally strong enough to find the lock it fit. Inside the tin were 3 seed packets, not lemons, heirloom tomatoes and figs, and something called moonflower, and a folded piece of paper gone soft at the creases. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. My Araminta. It said, "If you're reading this, you finally got the door open, which means they finally stopped winning, and you finally stopped believing them. This house always knew who it belonged to. So did I. From the day you were born, you were never the leftover, sweetheart. You were the whole reason. Plant something better than lemons. Gran." I sat down on the floor of that greenhouse in the dirt she loved, and I let myself cry for the first time in the entire story I've just told you. Not because I'd lost, but because I'd been right. Some deep, starved, 8-year-old part of me had always believed she was loved on purpose by somebody, and had been called crazy and jealous and cold for believing it. And here it was in her own hand. You were never the leftover. You were the whole reason. That's the thing. My mother spent a fortune and 33 years trying to steal and couldn't. Not the house, not the money, the knowing. If you've spent your life being told you were the difficult one, the jealous one, the less than one, hear me. Sometimes the person telling you you're worthless is the person who needs you to believe it because your smallness is holding up something they don't want you to look at. If a part of you has always suspected you were loved on purpose by someone once, that part isn't crazy. Trust it. It might be the only true thing they never managed to take. And if this story reached something in you, leave one word in the comments for the person in your life who saw you clearly. I read them, and so does everyone scrolling past deciding whether to believe their own. Gideon and I married in October in the greenhouse with new glass and 11 people who'd never once made me feel like the end of the table. Enid came every Thursday after that. The way she'd come for my grandmother, and sat where Effie used to sit. The trust distributed the week we married. Exactly the way my grandmother designed it. 30 years in advance. A life of my own first. Chosen for love and for nothing else. And only then the means to hold it. She'd built a clock my mother couldn't stop and I couldn't rush. It went off at the exact right minute. The tomatoes came up in the spring. The figs took 2 years. The moonflowers bloom at night now. White and enormous over the spot where a lemon tree used to die in the dark. I was never the prettier one. My mother got that part right. I was the one she trusted. Turns out that was the part that came with the house, and everything worth having inside.